Good day, my brothers and sisters. I hope you've been having a blessed week. May God continue to bless us in the locations that we reside in and grant us the request of our hearts to grow in the musical knowledge following His spiritual leadership, to be able to play for Him and interpret the music that He has destined for His end time, that we may be fruitful and expand our musical talents. In the eternal name, William. Amen. Welcome back, my brothers and sisters, and now we will be going over the next lesson, but before that, please make sure that you've completed Lesson 1 and the assignments that are going along with it. To begin, we're going to go over Lesson 2, which is now going into notation itself. So let's review. What is music notation? Music notation, or musical notation, is any system used to visually represent orally perceived music played with instruments or sung by the human voice using written, printed, or otherwise produced symbols, including notations for durations of absence of sound, such as rest. Other names for music notation are sheet music, and other instruments can also use notation, such as tablature. Now we will be going in depth about this. The question is, what is a music note? In music, a note is a symbol denoting a musical sound. In English usage, a note is also the sound itself. Notes can represent the pitch and duration of a sound in a musical notation. A note can also represent a pitch class. We will be getting into pitch classes later on in the semester. What I want us to do now is be able to identify the different parts of any music note. For this example, we will be using this note here. This part of the note is called the note head. It is the body of the note. This part, the long part, is the stem. This part is common to all note types that are shorter in duration than a whole note. For this particular note here, this note has a part that is called the flag. Notes with flags are shorter in duration than a quarter note, and the more the flags, the shorter the duration of the note. The flag and/or stem can be facing either direction. The way that is decided, we will go over in the future. If it's a note that has a flag, the flag always goes the opposite direction of the stem. If the stem is going up, the flag goes down. If the stem is going down, the flag goes up. Now on to individual note values. We'll start off with the whole note. The whole note, as you see here, is basically just one big circle. A whole, if you want a simple way to remember what it's called. The whole note has no stem or flags, and its value or duration being how long the note is held out for, is equal to 4 beats or pulses. To visually represent this, we have a whole or entire pie shown here. And if we wanted to hold a note for twice as long as this, we use the symbol on the far left, which is called a double whole note. You will rarely ever see a symbol like this, but if you do ever come across this, you will now know what it means. So let me repeat. The whole note requires 4 beats or pulses. The next note on our list is the half note. This symbol in appearance is similar to the whole note, except it has a stem attached to it. And like its name implies, a half note is half the duration or length of a whole note, so it gets 2 beats or pulses. Now our pie is divided into 2 pieces. We now need 2 half notes to complete a whole note. Next up, we have our quarter note. This symbol is like a half note, but with the circle filled in. Please do not get the two confused. Half note has an open circle, quarter note has a closed circle. The quarter note is half the value of a half note, meaning that it is a fourth of the value of a whole note. It is equal to 1 beat or pulse, so you will need 2 quarter notes to make a half note and 4 quarter notes to make a whole note. Even smaller than a quarter note is an eighth note. This symbol is like a quarter note, but with a flag attached to its stem. The flag is meant to represent that this symbol is smaller than without it. An eighth note only has 1 flag. It is half the value of a quarter note. You now need 8 eighth notes to make a whole note. So our pie is now divided even further. It is now equal to half a beat or pulse. But the thing about notes with flags is that whenever you have more than one right next to each other, they will usually be connected with each other with a beam as shown here. Typically you will see as many as 4 notes connected to each other, but they will still be 8th notes. It's like if you stretch the flags out of each note and tied them together. This makes it easier to read. Following the previous pattern, we now have our 16th notes. This symbol is just like the 8th note, but now has 2 flags instead of 1, meaning that its value is even smaller than the one before it. It is now equal to 1/4 of a beat or pulse, and we now need 16 of these to equal a whole note. And exactly like we have more than one 8th note right next to each other, when 16th notes are right next to each other, we connect them using a beam. And since they have 2 flags, we represent them having 2 beams when connected. Now our pi is divided down even further. Now for our last division symbol, the 32nd note. We continue to follow our previous pattern, and to show that this symbol is even smaller in value, we add another flag, totaling now to 3. We now are at 1/8 of a beat or pulse, and it takes 32 of these symbols to equal an entire whole note. Most likely you won't come across a symbol this small unless you're playing a very slow song that gives you enough time to play these notes. Here I've added a chart to better help you visualize how many of each note it takes to make the previous note value. If you add 2 whole notes to get the double whole note on line 1, but we're going to focus on just this small area down here. Let's start on line 2. Here we have our whole note. Then on line 3, we have our 2 half notes that are needed to make a whole note. Next on line 4, we have our 4 quarter notes that are needed to make a whole note. On line 5, we have 8 8th notes that are required to make a whole note. On line 6, 16 16th notes are required to make a whole note. And on line 7, we have 32 32nd notes that are required to make a whole note. As you can see, a lot of music, all it is division. One note is needed to make the other one, and so on. And as you can see here as well, even though the notes are getting smaller, that just means that you have to play more notes in the same amount of time as the notes above or below it. When we get into rhythm, I'll give you examples on how this will sound. But for now, I want you to know what the note names are, how many beats or pulses each one gets, and how many it takes to make each note. It would be very beneficial for you to write down this chart and keep it somewhere so you can look at it often to better memorize each one. Now on to the part that most people struggle with, so don't worry if it takes you a bit to understand this part. We will be going over dotted notes. Dotted notes, or the notes that we learned earlier, will now be adding another symbol along with it, which is this dot that is right here. A dot following a note, so it always goes after the music note, means that you add half the value of the note it's attached to. So for example, this dot is attached to a quarter note. A quarter note is equal to 1. So what is half of 1? That would be a half, which is an 8th note. So we just add the 2 together. A quarter note plus an 8th note is equal to a dotted quarter. So we now have 1.5 beats or pulses. And like I said, at first it may seem a little complicated, but let's look at more examples. In this top example, we have a dotted half note. From our definition earlier, all we need to do is find out what is half of a half note. Remembering from our chart as well, a half note is equal to 2. So half of a half note is a quarter note, which is equal to 1. So when we combine a half note and a quarter note, we get 2 plus 1, which equals 3. So a dotted half note is equal to 3 beats or pulses. Underneath that, we have a dotted 8th note. Oh, now we're going to be getting into more fractions, so don't be alarmed. What is the value of an 8th note? It's half a beat or pulse. And what is half of that? That would be a 4th, or a 16th note. So half plus a 4th equals 3/4. So when we add an 8th note and a 16th note, we get a dotted 8th, which is equal to 3/4 of a beat or pulse. And lastly, we have a dotted whole note. We will follow the same rules as before. So a whole note is equal to 4 beats or pulses. Half of a whole note is a half note, which is equal to 2 beats or pulses. When we add them together, 4 plus 2 equals 6. So a dotted whole note is just equal to 6 beats or pulses. The reason we have dots in the first place is to represent values that we don't already have symbols for. We don't have a music symbol for 6 beats, or 3 beats, or 3/4 of a beat, but with dots, we're able to write music more accurately in the way we want it to sound. And for our last music symbol we will go over for this lesson is the ghost note, which are notes that represent percussion rhythms without pitch. So for drums, cymbals, triangles, etc., only percussion musicians will ever see notes like these. But in the future, if any instrumentalist or vocalist decides they want to pick up a percussion instrument, they'll be able to understand and identify what this note is and means. And just like I said, this symbol is just for percussion instruments that do not use pitch, as in they don't have the qualities to either go up or down in highness or lowness of tone. Let's review. Our whole notes are equal to 4 beats or pulses. Our half notes are equal to 2 beats or pulses. Our quarter notes are equal to 1 beat or pulse. An eighth note is equal to a half beat or pulse. 16th notes are equal to a 4th beat or pulse. And a 32nd note is equal to an 8th beat or pulse. We need 2 half notes to make a whole note, 4 quarter notes to make a whole note, 8 eighth notes to make a whole note, 16 16th notes to make a whole note, and 32 32nd notes to make a whole note. But how many quarter notes are needed to make a half note? 2. How many eighth notes are needed to make a quarter note? Also 2. 16th notes, how many do we need those to make an eighth note? Just 2. And how many 32nd notes do we need to make a 16th note? Just 2. So most of these are just divisions of each other. Make sure you keep that in mind, but don't get them all confused. This concludes our second lesson for Language of Music. There will be an assignment that will go with this lesson, so please make sure to work on that and turn it in before the next class is uploaded so you don't get behind. Also, if you haven't done so, please complete the assignments that have been posted for Lesson 1 and the Introductions assignment as well, so you don't get a 0. If you have any issues uploading them to the classroom, please let me know so I can help you. And please make sure you're submitting the assignment to the correct one posted on the Classwork tab. May you continue to have a blessed week, and we'll see each other next time. May God continue to bless us and let us be able to continue to work in His divine program. See you next time. Bye!